The plan is to do a survey of Luke. Imagine, I looked at if we did, phrase by phrase of Luke. How long could we be in the first chapter? Here's something I did not know until this study, and I'm guessing because of the context and why I asked this question, I'm sure you'll be able to answer it correctly. What is the longest book in the New Testament? Well, should be pretty obvious. It's going to be Luke. And the second longest book in the New Testament? It's Acts. I honestly did not realize that. Jeremiah is actually the longest book in the Bible. It is nigh on to twice the amount of material as the Gospel of Luke. And then a little bit less than that is the book of Genesis. Luke, I think, comes in at 7 or 8, and that's if you count the words. Now, this word count I'm giving you and the word count I saw, I don't know if this is English words or Greek words or Hebrew words. It's probably in English. But in any case, Luke is the longest of the New Testament books. It has just about the most chapters, like Acts does, has 28 chapters. But there's a couple of chapters in Luke, like the first chapter. How many verses does it have? 80 verses. And so normally you get 80 verses, you're in the Psalms somewhere, right? Normally you're in the Psalms at that many verses. So Luke is a lot of material. It is 19,500 words. Acts is about 1,000 words less. Matthew and Acts are just nearly exactly the same size than John. All right, so it's interesting that this vast amount of material, and of course the Apostle Paul, he wrote 13 books. Luke only wrote 2. But if you go by amount of material, they're a lot closer than you would think. And so it's interesting that the longest of the Gospels, the longest 2 books, the book of the early church, which is, and again, we all understand, don't we, that Luke and Acts are volume 1 and volume 2 of the same story. There's a couple of, if I got to, back in the day, rearrange or arrange the New Testament, I would have put Luke and Acts together, one after the other. I know why John is put last, because the Matthew, Mark, and Luke tells the story in such similar ways and similar terms that they're called the synoptics, the Gospels that you see together. And so if you had 2, it'd be stereoscopic. If you have 3, what would that be? Triscopic, 3. You have 3 visions of the same thing. And so those 3 Gospels are put together. Then the 4th Gospel, as John is often called, then Luke, then Acts. But Luke and Acts are very much the same story, volume 1, volume 2. From the birth of Jesus and the preliminaries to that, to the resurrection in volume 1. From the resurrection, the beginning of the church, and the spread of the church, until Paul's, just before Paul is on trial before the emperor in volume 2. That also pretty well dates when Acts was written, because if you have this big story leading up to the trial of Paul before the emperor, but you don't tell the story of the trial, you leave Paul in jail, when did you finish writing the story? At that moment. It brought it up to the exact moment. So right before the persecution of the church in AD 64 is when it's very obvious that Acts was finished and sent on to Theophilus. And Luke either would have been sent with it or most likely just shortly before. So the amount of time it would take to write one and then write the other. So one is finished and sent, the other is finished and sent. And Paul is still awaiting trial before the emperor. I might take this a little bit out of order here on the outline I gave you. It seems to me, more recent scholarship seems to be very friendly to this idea, that Acts and Luke were some of the documents that were handed over to Roman officials to explain why Paul is here. Because if you recall in the book of Acts, on what charge did Paul get sent to Rome to be on trial for? Yeah, that's why the Jews caused a riot that led to Paul's arrest. What do you think the emperor would think when this Roman citizen appears on the charge of taking another Roman, maybe a citizen, maybe not, but taking a non-Jewish person into that temple over in Jerusalem where we got all those trouble with those hotheads? What do you think the Roman emperor would think about that? Why is this here? Right? Why are you in my court? And they actually are trying to find a good reason to justify sending Paul on to Rome in his trials before the Roman governors in Acts 22 and Acts 23. They're trying to, 23 and 26. So they're actually trying to find a good reason to say, hey, why is this guy here? And so it's becoming a bit more of a popular theory to think that Luke and the book of Acts are the documents that would go with Paul when he went to the Roman officials. It's like, why are you here? Well, here's my side of the story. Here's the whole story, starting from the beginning. And so, to me, I find that to be an attractive thought. But in any case, Luke tells this man Theophilus, and he calls him most excellent Theophilus. In the book of Acts, most excellent appears twice. Both times it's about Roman governors. Most excellent was a title of nobility, a title of rule, a title of office in the Roman Empire. And so here's a man named Theophilus, or a man called Theophilus. And why do we think that might not be his actual name?
Doesn't it just mean God, lover of God?
Yeah, it means lover of God. There are Christians who, soon after this, the name Theophilus will become a somewhat common name among Christians. But it's not all that common a name among Romans, and it seems more like a descriptive term, or maybe a pseudonym, so that some Roman official who had something to do with Paul's trial or could have some influence at Paul's trial was given these documents so that he would know exactly and that it would be encouraging to him to know all of these things. And then this is shared with the brethren because we have this, well-researched first-class history of these things. And so Theophilus, I think, is most likely, I think it's pretty common to think Theophilus is a pseudonym because at this time, for a long time after, would be dangerous to for a Roman of the high standing we think this man had, to be associated by name with the Christians, with the brethren. So we have this well-researched, and Luke tells us, this one thing about Luke. Luke tells us he researched these things. He looked into these things, and it talks about them being also in exact order, or some translations say consecutive order. And so Luke, especially because of what he writes in the second book in Acts, where Luke mentions official after official after official, and he mentions geographic name after name and so many place names, so many titles of officials, so many different exact specific vocabulary. There's exact specific vocabulary that Luke uses in the book of Acts that was only in some places 10 or 15 years before or 10 or 15 years after, you wouldn't have had that exact combination of titles and names and places. Because as political lines changed and different people ruled, you would have a change of the name of the title for the ruler would change. The name of a currency would change. The name of a festival would change. The names would change. The titles would change. A lot of the people that Luke mentions in the book of Acts in particular, they found inscriptions. They found coins. They found statues. They found memorial plaques. And everything of every particular detail of any little factual thing in the book of Luke, there's never been one that's been proven to be incorrect. There's a lot that were thought to be incorrect before more evidence was uncovered.
And compare
Right.
the person said he was listening to in 1993 or something.
Right, yeah, and it was like 2 years after that the show was actually on the air.
Right. And so from you're not being very, I mean, that's somebody that would have had the benefit of the internet to try and correct things like that. But it just shows how conscientious a historian Luke was. This is compared to other historical documents, like if you compare it to Livy or
Right.
other Roman historians, this is, I mean, way higher level
Right.
than they are even.
Right, and both it's concise and detailed at the same time. And we've mentioned Josephus in our study of the Intertestament period because he writes so much about it. But have you ever looked at Josephus at all? It is not concise. It is not concise. And this last week I was listening to a program about the reliability of Luke in Acts and the speeches. For instance, the speeches that are recorded in the book of Acts, they're not like the normal speeches recorded in Roman histories because, they didn't have recordings of things. They often didn't even have people taking notes. They had people who would, kind of give a summary of a speech after the fact. But in most Roman histories, the speeches are obviously not the actual words the guy said. It's a rhetorical exercise by the author. And in the book of Acts, there's none of that. And so the reliability of the record of the speeches even is unique. And so in a lot of ways, Luke is a more modern type of history than the people who were his contemporaries. We have modeled how we write histories more after Luke than after anybody else of his time. And so he's truly, as we say here in the key points, he is a first-class historian in the recording of events, and he's been tested by critical examinations of his text. I don't know of any ancient text that has been more critically looked at, looking at every detail, sometimes by friendly critics, sometimes by unfriendly critics. They're trying. Some of them have looked at it to try and see, prove that Luke is correct. Some have looked at it from a perspective of proving that Luke is wrong. But ever since basically the 1880s, there was a guy named William Ramsey. St. Paul, the Roman Citizen, is one of his books. There's another one, St. Paul, the Roman Traveler. He in the 1880s went and did some of the original archaeology throughout what is now Turkey and Greece, looking critically at the book of Acts to see where Luke got it all wrong. He was an unbeliever when he started the project. He was a believer when he finished the project and wrote his book. And so, anyway, if you're interested in that, William Ramsey, you can find his story. It's a pretty famous one. But Luke is an excellent historian. There's other things that are unique to his gospel, even compared to other gospels, and certainly compared to contemporaneous histories that really let you have great confidence that this is an inspired book. All right, we'll say some more about that next time. So you have your first lesson on Luke.